Welcome, my name is Mark Treadwell. Now, we've been looking at the development of capacity around how our brain learns, and we've been looking at that from a neuroscience, a psychology and a sociology perspective, and we've been developing a framework from that of a universal learning process. And once we develop that, then we realise there's a range of competencies that are required in order for the learner to take agency over their learning. And so we've dealt with 3 of those competencies, and in this video clip we're going to be looking at 3 more, and we're going to look at the language of learning, we're going to look at managing self, and connecting and reflecting. The language of learning is changing significantly. Not that long ago, that whole space was dominated by the notion of reading and writing. Reading and writing was central to what we did and what we knew about as learning. But now, increasingly, we're watching more video clips in terms of our learning, not just for watching television and movies and DVDs and downloaded movies, etc. But now we're watching movies to learn from. And YouTube has just grown dramatically. And that dramatic growth represents an audience of literally hundreds of millions of people who are using video to learn rather than text-based learning. That does not mean we can leave text-based learning out of the picture entirely. It just means now that there's greater equity between visual language, oral language, text-based language and multimedia language. And each of those 4 domains requires learners of any age to be able to produce artifacts in that domain and also be able to interpret those. So there's 2 strands, if you like, for each of those 4 domains, producing and interpreting. So for example, with visual language, in order to produce, you have to create an artifact of some sort to represent something that you want to get an idea across around, and then you need to be able to, in terms of interpreting, decode that. So it's creating and decoding. Whereas in multimedia, we form multimedia and then we synthesize the complexity of the multimedia, imagery and sound and images and text and all the things that go into there, animations, to actually get an understanding of multimedia. So producing and interpreting these 4 different types of media is hugely important. It's no longer just good enough to say, well, we're going to do reading and writing and that's the mainstay of what we do. We do have to actually work across those 4 domains now in both producing and also being able to interpret. So that's changing our landscape, and so what we're seeing really is a shift in paradigm. Hundreds of years ago we made a gradual transition from an oral-centric learning system where we learned from listening to others and from speaking ourselves, and we shifted to a text-based system where we had to learn to read and write, and schools, essentially compulsory schooling, was built really on the necessity of that, because in fact that took something between 5,000 and 7,000 hours to learn to read and write. And now we're shifting again into much more of a mixed media environment whereby we can publish video, we can create video very easily, we can create audio and we can publish audio very easily, we can create visual media and publish that very easily to a global audience if we want to. In some cases, millions of people watching a single video. So literacy now has taken a much wider form. The landscape for literacy now is far more varied with far more different elements in there now. There's different types of literacy as well. There's critical literacy, there's information literacy, media literacy, there's scientific literacy, there's a cognitive literacy, there's technological literacy. There's different types of literacies, and each of those also have visual, oral, textual and multimedia elements. So literacy is incredibly complex, but it has to be done really, really well. So we really felt there was a need to specify a language for learning. We also want in that language of learning to have a developmental capacity as well, and after testing different ideas, we found that the best one so far for us is using the Solow taxonomy, which really takes the notion of developing surface, deep and profound questions, comments, statements, ideas. So surface, deep and profound. And so like a surface question might be, what was the most difficult aspect of the learning process for you this time round? In other words, in your last learning process, what do you find the most difficult? So that's a simple reflective process where the learner might say, well, look, I really found processing so much information and synthesizing it really difficult. A deeper question might be, what was the refinement that you actually applied to your learning process last time? And a profound question around that space at a reasonably low level might be, what was a key thinking strategy that you used, which you like now to actually get some greater capacity around? You'd like to develop that further. What would you like to do there? And so we can actually develop our questioning strategies from surface, deep to profound if we have that literacy. Okay? So the other thing we need to do is we need to have a series of verbs, adverbs, adjectives, and they need to be available to learners, both memorised and remembered, but also available on the walls, because we're constantly finding new words. So the walls in our classrooms are changing. In 30, 40 years ago possibly, it was mostly teacher-produced work or commercial posters, etc. that we put up on our walls. And then it changed to student work, the best student work generally speaking, being put up on our walls. And now what we're seeing in these classrooms that are moving down this space, and these learning spaces that are moving into this space now, is that we're seeing the walls are covered with dynamic representations of the learner's work in progress. So not the most beautiful material, but it shows the development of ideas and concepts and concept frameworks. But mixed around all that are lists of verbs and adverbs and lists of adjectives. And in many situations, schools are using Bloom's modified taxonomy or other taxonomies to have lists of words around remembering, lists of words around understanding, lists of words around analysis, lists of words around evaluation and creating, all around the room so that learners can pick those up. And then the wonderful thing we've seen recently is use of window chalk, and so students are adding new words to those lists all the time, dynamically, when they find a new word. So our literacy is an absolutely critical element when we come to talk about the competency of the learner. They need to have that literacy to describe their own learning, to ask themselves questions, and to ask their peers questions, and to make commentary on their peers' work. So literacy is absolutely critical. We also look at managing self, and managing self is an incredibly complex and diverse competency, and it's really a matter of almost, where do we limit this? How do we sort of package this in a way that doesn't become overwhelming? Because we have to look at the traditional sort of notions of things like managing our resources, but also managing our emotions. Okay, managing our emotions is something that we need some work around, because some young learners and even older learners are struggling to sort of manage that emotional sort of component of their world. They need to manage their virtual world, which is a whole new way of looking at their security, at their safety, etc. Their cognitive skills need to be managed as well. What cognitive skills they need in terms of their thinking processes, how does that blend in terms of literacy? Because if we're going to reflect on ourselves and our actions and what we want to do, then we have to have the literacy to talk to ourselves, okay, internally. Now, quite often we don't actually use words doing that. It's a fascinating little process, actually. But we need capacity around that. Managing our principles and our character is also important. So when it comes to managing self is quite a diverse and quite rich space that we need to spend some time developing proactively in our classrooms. And once again, we've got some rubrics in the resource that you can go and see around this, and of course there's a body of knowledge that underpins managing self, such as things like, how do I develop confidence and agency and active involvement over my world? How do I do that? And we have to give the learners a chance to practice that. Taking risks, how do I actually sort of look at the risk-taking I'm doing and see, is that appropriate? Okay, because risk-taking is really important. We need to be willing to be able to make mistakes and live with that. We will make mistakes all the time, and unless we're willing to make mistakes, we're not going to learn. We're not going to learn very well at all. Knowing that there's times for cooperation and times when we need to just sit down and work on our own. We need to have those reflective moments. We need to have that metacognitive capacity. So there's a body of knowledge in there. Then we want to actually build that into a series of techniques. Okay, so in fact, how do we build those into techniques where we can actively manage our impulsivity, for example? How do I actively manage the conflict and having conversations around the difficult things in life? The difficult conversations, those are very important. How do I increase the effectiveness and efficiency of my planning and strategy? So each of these things are important, and so those are some of the techniques we need to develop. And then out of that knowledge and those techniques, we also need to develop dispositions where we're no longer consciously having to think about these things. They've become automated into our world. And so we need to understand that resourcefulness, for example, is far more powerful than the resources we have. So if I can't find something, I'm going to think, well, what else can I do? Rather than say, I can't do anything now because I can't find exactly what I want. Being resourceful is going and actually working with others and looking around and going to libraries and internet and various places to find the resources we need when we need those resources. We need to be passionate about what we do. Passionate people drive change. Nothing happens, in terms of change unless someone somewhere is passionate about making a difference. The last of our competencies is around connecting and reflecting. And connecting and reflecting may seem quite an odd competency in many respects, but we're starting to realise its growing importance. And connecting and reflecting is all about sort of taking our knowledge, ideas, concept frameworks, and seeing how the existing material that we have in our heads can have added new material to that. Where does it sit alongside? Is there a conflict between that? Okay, so that's now becoming more and more important. Reflecting on our learning includes questions like, have we clarified the purpose of the investigation we're taking part in at the moment? Have we carried out sufficient research so we can actually be critical enough of that and have enough research to actually, through a range of different media and different people's perspectives and opinions, to actually come to something which is quite valid? Can we ask critical, open, Socratic questions of ourselves and of the work that we're looking at as well? Have we got the depth and range of information? Is that the depth and range across different media formats, etc.? So connecting and reflecting is a critical aspect and a critical competency, as are all the competencies. The growing level of what is known and understood allows learners to become increasingly creative and possibly innovative if they want to actually leverage that knowledge and understanding they have into new product systems and environments. Increasingly, we want our learners to build capability through these competencies. The only way they're going to manage that is if we rethink some of the topics and themes that we have historically taught. And we have mentioned this already, but we need to be aware that in fact that thematic approach to learning is a very inefficient approach to learning. It produces a lot of busy, pretty work and a lot of knowledge that you might use maybe. In other words, it's knowledge acquired just in case, as opposed to knowledge acquired just in time. And so we're going to have to rethink the very substrate of what many schools use around the world, and that is these thematic topics of space, dinosaurs, heroes, whatever it might be, and then start focusing on concepts. What concepts and concept frameworks do we need learners to understand, and what is the body of knowledge that sits underneath that is worth remembering and is worth knowing? So that draws to a close this particular video clip. You can go to the text-based resource and there's additional notes there and different examples of the rubrics, etc. that we've talked about. And please make good use of that, and you can put that up as big posters in your classrooms. I really don't mind what you do with that resource. You can modify it, add new things to it. That's up to you. Thank you very much for watching this video, and all the best with your work. Thank you very much.